Hello, everybody. Pat Flynn here, and we are going to talk about Plato's theory of recollection. This will be part of an extended study series on the Platonic dialogues. I want to begin with a shorter series, just summarizing some of the core Platonic ideas. And I thought, why don't we begin with the theory of recollection? It's a really important part of Platonic epistemology. And epistemology is the study of knowledge. Epistemologists like to ask questions like, what is knowledge? What are the conditions of knowledge? How do we know when we have knowledge? And Plato's going to take a whack at that. He's going to take a whack at that with his theory of recollection. So I want to give you a 1-minute summary. And then what we will do is we will actually read a bit from the Phaedo. And this is, by the way, this is a nice, if you're watching the video, you can see this little book I have here. This is the Benjamin Jowett translation of the Meno and the Phaedo. And obviously you can't beat going to the man himself directly, but I'll give you the best summary I can. And then we will read, or I will read to you, a selection from the Phaedo on this. So Plato's theory of recollection essentially is this, that all knowledge is not just discovery, it's actually rediscovery. It's remembering something that we already knew. When did we know it? Well, apparently in a previous life, that the soul pre-exists the body, according to Plato, and that when we became embodied, we forgot things. And through a process of not being taught, but really sort of questioned and pressured by a good dialogue partner, we can come to remember what we forgot. So all knowledge is recollection. It's remembering stuff, ideas that are actually within us that we acquired in a previous life. And so that's what knowledge is, according to Plato. It's recollecting. And this will make more sense as we read through the section of the Phaedo here. And it's important in the Phaedo, the theory of recollection is given as one of several arguments for the immortality of the soul. But you also have the theory of recollection articulated in the Meno. And the Meno is more about virtue. What is virtue? How is virtue acquired? But you also get an account of the theory of recollection there as well. So before I start reading again, it's important, I think, to understand some of the motivations behind the theory of recollection and a lot of Plato's motivations in general, and that, the Platonic system is very holistic. And Lloyd Gerson, who's a great scholar, I love Gerson's work, he says, it's probably best to try and understand Platonism in contrast to a lot of modern philosophy that is nominalistic, relativistic, skeptical, mechanistic, materialistic, reductionistic, nihilistic. Plato and Platonism, none of those things. Platonism is anti-nominalistic, it's anti-reductionistic, it's anti-materialistic, it's anti-mechanistic, it's anti-skepticism, it's anti-relativism, it's anti-nihilism. And for Gerson, Plato isn't the only Platonist. He thinks that Aristotle, in a larger sense, is a Platonist, a big tent Platonist, as it's been called before, and so is Aquinas. That all these thinkers are sort of united under this big tent Platonism by those commitments, those anti-commitments: anti-nominalism, anti-relativism, anti-skepticism, anti-mechanism, anti-materialism, anti-reductivism. What am I forgetting? Anti-nihilism. all those positions, right? That in different ways characterize a lot of modern philosophy. So Plato, he's in a lot of ways, he's positing not just the forms and the realm of forms, but his theory of recollection to try and secure what he thinks are the necessary conditions for knowledge. He thinks we do have knowledge. He thinks that knowledge is not only possible, but it's actual. Because it's actual, it must be possible. And also further, that meaningful communication is possible. And he thinks that to avoid a sort of radical skepticism where the most we can do is just sort of wiggle our finger, we need to discover the necessary conditions for knowledge and meaningful communication and identity through time and non-exclusive predication and all those different things. And that's where the forms do a lot of work. So if you're not familiar with Plato's forms, stay tuned. We'll do a separate series on that. But this is all connected, right? Because the theory of recollection really is sort of saying that in a previous life, we were kind of able to dance around and contemplate with the realm of the forms. And so we acquired this knowledge, or sort of always had this knowledge, in a previous state where the soul preexisted the body, and then we became embodied, we forget, and then we recollect. That is Plato's theory of knowledge in a nutshell. So I hope that's clear. Maybe you could just stop the video right here and be satisfied with that. If so, give 2 perfects, 2 thumbs up. But otherwise, let's dive a little deeper. Let's read now together. And if you guys have any questions, you are certainly welcome to post those. I'm turning to the Phaedo. So if you want to follow along, you're welcome to do that. I will try to read as articulately as I can. I know I tend to wag my jaw pretty fast sometimes. So, but the great thing about YouTube and iTunes is you can adjust the speed. Isn't that a neat feature? So sometimes when I'm listening to stuff, I'll like put it at 1.5 speed or 2 times speed. And sometimes if there's a real fast, slobbery talker like myself, I'll slow it down a little bit. So adjust the speed accordingly. And we're picking up at in the Phaedo here. And I think these couple of passages should really help to articulate, give you the core understanding of Plato's theory of recollection and some of the motivations behind it. Now, remember, the context here is an argument for the immortality of the soul. That's the context in the Phaedo. So let's begin. Cebes added, "Your favorite doctrine, Socrates, that knowledge is simply recollection, if true, also necessarily implies a previous time in which we have learned that which we now recollect. But this would be impossible unless our soul had been in some place before existing in the form of man. Here, then, is another proof of the soul's immortality." So again, the context here is arguing for the immortality of the soul. And what's being put forth is this doctrine of recollection. And what's being claimed is, if this doctrine of recollection is true, then our soul had to exist before it was embodied. And that itself would be proof or evidence of the soul's immortality, right? Okay, continuing. "But tell me, Cebes," said Simmias, interposing, "what arguments are urged in favor of this doctrine of recollection? I am not very sure at the moment that I remember them." "One excellent proof," said Cebes, "is afforded by questions. If you put a question to the person in a right way, he will give true answers of himself. But how could he do this unless there were knowledge and right reason already in him? And this is most clearly shown when he is taken to a diagram or anything of that sort." And that you should compare to the Meno. And in the Meno, what Socrates does is he responds to a challenge by Meno, a skeptical challenge that, hey, what's the point of even pursuing knowledge? Can we even do it? Socrates, all you do is confuse people and leave them feeling perplexed. What good is this? And then Socrates argues for the theory of recollection, that we can come to knowledge and that this questioning is a good thing. It doesn't leave you perpetually paralyzed or confused. You just have to sort of be patient and be willing to work through these things. And what Socrates does is he takes Meno's slave boy and he kind of works him through a series of geometry problems. And he insists, "I'm not teaching this guy. I'm not teaching him anything. I'm just asking him questions. Now watch as he comes to knowledge and he rediscovers things he already knew as he sort of probes and pressures him with various questions." And then, yeah, this seems to happen. Meno's slave seems to come to various answers and knowledge. And then Socrates says to Meno, "Hey, look, did I teach him anything? No. Did you teach him these things? You've known him your entire life." And Meno says, "No, I never taught him these things. Nobody taught him these things." And then Socrates goes, "Aha, see, they must have already been in him in a way. And all we did was just get him to rediscover and recollect what he already knows." So what was said right there is sort of, you should compare that to the Meno. This is why it's very good to read these two dialogues together. Okay, so now I'm going to continue reading from the Phaedo. "But if," said Socrates, "you are still incredulous, Simmias, I would ask you whether you may not agree with me when you look at the matter in another way. I mean, if you are still incredulous as to whether knowledge is recollection." "Incredulous I am not," said Simmias, "but I want to have this doctrine of recollection brought to my own recollection. And from what Cebes has said, I am beginning to recollect and be convinced, but I should still like to hear what you were going to say." A lot of good, funny little lines and puns in these dialogues sometimes. "I should like to recollect this doctrine of recollection." Indeed you shall. Okay, continuing. This is what I would say, he replied. We should agree, if I am not mistaken, that when a man recollects, he must have known at some previous time. Very true, very true. And what is the nature of this knowledge or recollection? I mean, to ask whether a person who, having seen or heard or in any way perceived anything, knows not only that, but has a conception of something else, which is the subject, not of the same, but of some other kind of knowledge, may not be fairly said to recollect that of which he has the conception? What do you mean? I mean what I may illustrate by the following instance. The knowledge of a liar is not the same as the knowledge of a man. True. And yet, what is the feeling of lovers when they recognize a lyre or a garment or anything else which the beloved, has been in the habit of using? Do not they, from knowing the lyre, form in the mind's eye an image of the youth to whom the lyre belongs? And this is recollection. In like manner, anyone who sees Simmias may remember Cebus, and there are endless examples of the same thing. This will be tied together here shortly. Gentle listeners, be patient if you haven't heard this before. Endless indeed, replied Simmias. And recollection is most commonly a process of recovering that which has already been forgotten through time and inattention. Very true indeed, he said. Well, and may you not also, from seeing the picture of a horse or a lyre, remember a man? And from the picture of Simmias, you may be led to remember Cebus? True. Or you may also be led to the recollection of Simmias himself? Quite so. And in all these cases, the recollection may be derived from things either like or unlike. It may be. And when the recollection is derived from like things, then another consideration is sure to arise, which is whether the likeness in any degree falls short or not of that which is recollected. Very true, he said. And shall we proceed a step further and affirm that there is such a thing as equality, not of one piece of wood or stone with another, but that over and above this, there is absolute equality? Shall we say so? So now we're getting into the argument from equality, as I like to think about it. This is an important part of what's motivating this theory of recollection. So here's where to really pay attention. Say so, yes, replied Simmias, and swear to it with all the confidence in life. And do we know the nature of this absolute essence? To be sure, he said. And whence did we obtain this knowledge? Did we not see equalities of material things, such as pieces of wood and stone, and gather from them the idea of equality, which is different from them? For you will acknowledge that there is a difference. Or look at the matter in another way. Do not the same pieces of wood or stone appear at one time equal, and another time unequal? This is certain. But are real equals ever unequal? Or is the idea of equality the same as inequality? Impossible, Socrates. Then these so-called equals are not the same with the idea of equality? I should say, clearly not, Socrates. And yet from these equals, although differing from the idea of equality, you conceived and attained that idea? Very true, he said, which might be like or might be unlike them. Okay, we got about 2 more pages. Stay with me. It's going to get good. Yes, but that makes no difference. Whenever from seeing one thing, you conceived another, whether like or unlike, there must surely have been an act of recollection. Very true. But then what would you say of equal portions of wood and stone or other material equals? And what is the impression produced by them? Are they equals in the same sense in which absolute equality is equal? Or do they fall short of this perfect equality in a measure? Yes, he said, in a very great measure, too, they fall short. And must we not allow that when I or anyone looking at any object observes that the thing which he sees aims at being some other thing, but falls short of and cannot be that other thing, but is inferior, he who makes this observation must have had a previous knowledge of that to which the other, although similar, was inferior. Certainly. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. That's a really important point. We got a little bit more to read. But we're calling things equal, say 2 sticks. And what Socrates is saying is they're never perfectly equal, right? Not in the material world. We never encounter perfect equality, right? But we're making this judgment that these things are equal. And this judgment seems to presuppose a knowledge of something that we never encounter in the material world, namely the form of equality, the absolute essence of equality, right? And it's our encountering of these things in the material world that, although they are inferior to the form of absolute equality, causes us to sort of recollect this notion of absolute equality, right? And it has to be there in a way, because it's not something we can get from the material world, because anything, sticks, stones, are never perfectly equal, right? They approximate perhaps, but they're never perfectly equal, right? The notion, here's another way to think about it. The notion of absolute equality or triangularity or whatever, it's determinate and it's unambiguous and it's exact in its conceptual content, but nothing physical or material is ever like that, right? It's always imperfect to some degree. It always falls short or is inferior to some degree. So it seems like, yeah, maybe not everything is physical or material. Certainly a possession of concepts and these universal notions like equality or goodness or triangularity or liberty or whatever is something that, according to Plato, is recollected, right? Once we encounter certain things in the world that approximate, but always fall short to these particular notions, right? So it's really important to understand, I guess, how he's angling in here at this. I hope that's clear. Okay. And has not this been our own case in the matter of equals and of absolute equality? Precisely. Then we must have known equality previously to the time when we first saw the material equals and reflected that all these apparent equals strive to attain absolute equality but fall short of it. So what Socrates is saying, look, we must have already known this. We must have already had this notion of absolute equality in our back pocket. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to sort of make the judgments that we do. And absolute equality is nothing we find out here in the material world, right? It's been in our back pocket, if you will. It's something that's sort of already in us. Very true. And we recognize also that this absolute equality has only been known and can only be known through the medium of sight or touch, or of some of the other senses, which are all alike in this respect. Yes, Socrates, as far as the argument is concerned, one of them is the same as the other. From the senses, then, is derived the knowledge that all sensible things aim at an absolute equality of which they fall short. Yes. Then before we began to see or hear or perceive in any way, we must have had a knowledge of absolute equality, or we could not have referred to that standard, the equals which are derived from the senses. For to that which they all aspire, but to that which they all fall short. No other inference can be drawn from the previous statements. I often love this sort of either excessive fawningness that Socrates' interlocutors have, or just the heaps of scorn that they throw on. So they're always kind of on the extremes, right? Anyways, continuing. And did we not see and hear and have the use of our other senses as soon as we were born? Certainly. Then we must have acquired the knowledge of equality at some previous time? Yes. That is to say, before we were born, I suppose? True. And if we acquire this knowledge before we were born, and were born having the use of it, then we also knew before we were born, and at the instant of birth, not only the equal, or the greater or the less, but all the other ideas. For we were not speaking only of equality, but of beauty, goodness, justness, holiness, and of all which we stamp with the name of essence in the dialectical process, both when we ask and when we answer questions. Of all this, we may certainly affirm that we acquired the knowledge before birth. We may. But if, after having acquired, we have not forgotten what in each case we acquired, then we must always have come into life having knowledge, and shall always continue to know as long as life lasts. For knowing is the acquiring and retaining knowledge, and not forgetting. Is not forgetting, Simmias, just the losing of knowledge? Quite true, Socrates. Final paragraph. But if the knowledge which we acquired before birth was lost by us at birth, and it afterwards, by the use of our senses, we recovered what we previously knew, will not the process which we call learning be a recovering of the knowledge which is natural to us? And may not this be rightly termed recollection? Very true. So there you have it. There is Plato's theory of recollection, and you can see how that is being motivated with the notion of equality and how everything that sort of is out there in the material physical world is falling short. And Plato, by the way, for future reference, I often use Plato and Socrates interchangeably. Socrates, of course, is the primary character in the dialogues, but Plato is the author. So hopefully that isn't confusing when I do that. Socrates is arguing, look, we must already have this sort of notion in our back pocket implicitly, right? Otherwise, we couldn't make the judgments that we do. So this, for Plato then anyways, this means that we must have acquired these notions, especially these universal notions, not just equality, but goodness and triangularity and holiness and whatever else in a previous life, in a previous mode of existence. And then we incarnated, if you like, we forgot. And then when we engage the senses with the material world, that's when we begin to recollect. So knowledge for Plato is indeed recollection. So there is your summary of Plato's theory of recollection. I hope you found that helpful. Please, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Now, I'll just say a few words in terms of interpretation. There is debate, among Platonic scholars of how literally this should be taken. Like, should we literally think that Plato thinks that the soul pre-existed the body and then becomes incarnate and whatnot? There are alternate interpretations that I've read about and heard from other philosophers. I think that you don't have to take that literally. You can just hold to some other form of innatism, like it's what you knew in a previous life is really just certain basic forms of ideas, and then recollection is sort of just growing from that or making deductions or what have you. I think I actually probably hold to the mainstream interpretation. It actually does seem more plausible to me that Plato, I think, really thought that the soul pre-existed the body and stuff like that. And of course, I'm not trying to evaluate that position here. I'm just trying to report it to you and help you to understand. I think, and also understand the motivations behind it. Sometimes people hear this theory of recollection, and I'd be curious what your responses were the first time you heard it. Do you think that this was crazy? Do you think that this made a lot of sense? I kind of felt both ways when I first started reading and studying Plato. It's like, okay, in a sense, this is kind of weird, but in a wider sense, when you understand really this very skeptical difficulties of trying to make sense of knowledge and the conditions of knowledge, it's actually not that crazy. It's actually not that crazy at all. And one could see how very easily somebody could come to think that Plato's account is correct. Now, I go more with Aristotle and Aquinas when it comes to knowledge. But of course, as Lloyd Gerson would argue, they're all Platonists at the end of the day, right? What they share in common, those guys are much more similar in terms of the anti-nominalism, anti-relativism, anti-skepticism, anti-mechanism, anti-reductionism than the more modern philosophers. So anyways, hey, it is Halloween for us anyways. We're doing Halloween at the Flynn household with the neighborhoods doing the trick-or-treating today. So I'm going to bounce. And if you like these shorter episodes, I was hoping to keep it 10 minutes. We went 23 minutes. I don't know what I was thinking. But if you like these, if you want more of these kind of episodes that just try to focus on one of the great ideas as Adler talks about them and present them to you and summarize them and maybe do a little bit of reading, let me know and we'll try and do more of that. Otherwise, stay tuned next week. We've got some cool live streams coming up with some other cool people. And also next month, which is coming very soon, Jim and I should be continuing Aristotle's the series on Aristotle's politics, and I should give another plug as well. If you like what we did here with Plato, Jim and I did that extensive 10-part series on Plato's The Republic. So please be sure to check that out if you want a much deeper dive into the Platonic worldview. That is free here on Philosophy for the People. And I wish you a very good day. Please do subscribe and ring that little bell and all that other good stuff. Bye-bye.